Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We're just going to get going in a minute or so, but we're going to let a few more people join just before we get started. While we're waiting, I'm just going to launch a quick poll. So it's just really to understand a wee bit about your own organisation and its where it is in its journey to net zero carbon in terms from a funding position. So I'll do that now. If you can just answer that, it takes a second or two, and we'll share the results during the webinar. Okay. You should see that now on your screens. Yeah, for those of you just joining, welcome to the webinar. We're just before we get underway, we're just waiting for a few more people to join and just having a quick poll on the main means your organisation is going to use to cover the extra cost of the journey to net zero carbon. So yeah, if you could answer that for us, that would be great, and we'll share the results in the webinar when we get going. Thank you. Okay, so just over half of you have voted on that. About 2/3 are racing through it now. Okay. Give it another 10 seconds and we'll finish that and get going. As I say, I'll share the results of that once we get going in the webinar. Okay, I'm going to close that just now. All right, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Raven Housing Trust webinar on the journey to net zero carbon. This one's all about social housing leading the way. My name is Stuart McDonald. I'm the Managing Director of C-Media. I'll be the event chair for today. Now, this is the third, of three webinars we're doing with Raven on the topic of the journey to net zero carbon. The first two were last week. Hopefully a few of you were able to join us for that. They were on obviously building new homes and also on existing homes and you know, investing in those to retrofit them to get to net zero carbon. Those slides from those sessions and the recordings of the webinars are all available on Raven Housing Trust's website. That will be the same for this session as well. So if you want to catch up anytime, everything will be there for you to do so. Like I say, this is the third of the three that we're doing. So really pleased to say that we've got a great panel with us today. Now there's three things I'm going to do quickly just now. First is obviously introduce the panel. The second is going to be just to share the results of the poll with you we just did. And the third is just some quick housekeeping points. Now, in terms of the panel, I'm really pleased to say we've got Jonathan Higgs with us here today, who is the Chief Executive of Raven Housing Trust. We've got Lord Richard Best, who is the President of the Sustainable Energy Association. But Richard will be familiar to many of you. I'm sure he's worn many hats over the years in terms of his campaigning work for affordable housing. So welcome, Richard. And also we have Helen Gregg, who is the Managing Director of Obsidian Enterprises. Again, Helen will be familiar to many of you from her work on the Building Better project through the National Housing Federation, and also as her time there on external affairs. Okay, welcome all of you. Really looking forward to the session today. Now, I mentioned I was going to share the results of that poll, so here we go. So let's see. All right, so in terms of the main means organisations are going to use to cover the extra cost of the journey to net zero carbon, let's have perhaps unsurprising at this stage, a third of you saying that you don't know at this point, and perhaps there's another way you're going to do it. Very few of you exploring the idea of a resident charge, and you know, pretty close between raising more funds, government grant, using your existing funds. So again, we can maybe come on to that a bit more later on into the webinar. Okay, so just in terms of some quick housekeeping points. We've got 10 minutes for each presentation. Now, just a note, Lord Best doesn't have any slides for his remarks, so you need to listen up, pay good attention to that. We'll have a good time, hopefully 15-20 minutes for Q&A discussion at the end. Now, for questions, again, most of you will be familiar with this in webinars. You have a question box as an attendee on your control panel on the right. So please post your questions in that. I'll see all the questions coming in, and we'll make sure we get through as many as we can during the discussion at the end. Okay, so I'm going to flick that off just now. You should see all four of us again now. Okay. Now I'm going to pass over to Jonathan Higgs just now for a couple of quick welcome remarks from Raven. So Jonathan, over to you.
Great, thanks, Stuart. Welcome everyone. For those of you that haven't been along to the first two in this series of 3 seminars, a very warm welcome. Raven's a relatively small association, about 6,000 homes, based in Surrey, but we're really keen to contribute to the national conversation about how our country moves to become net zero carbon. And that's why we've arranged these 3 seminars with some really knowledgeable speakers to share their perspectives on this challenge with us and with you. We've been working on this for about 10 to 12 months, so we have at Raven what I hope are some interesting reflections to share with you, alongside the insights from our first 2 speakers. So as Stuart has urged, please get your questions posted as we go through, and hopefully we can get a really good discussion going at the end. So thanks very much and a very warm welcome. Back to you, Stuart.
Okay, thanks very much, Jonathan. Okay, so we're going to hand it over now to Lord Best to give us his thoughts. So Lord Best, Richard, over to you.
Good, thank you very much. Well, big congratulations to Raven, because you know it is great to see. Jonathan, you describe yourself as a small housing association. It's amazing that 6,000 homes is now small, but you're really going for it. This, I think, is the biggest mission of all, isn't it? What we're after is saving the blooming planet. This is very big stuff, and you'd think at first sight, what can one housing association do? What can a bunch of housing associations do faced with the fantastically big problems that the whole planet faces? And I think the answer is they can vastly punch above their weight. The social housing providers, to me, are the absolute key to the UK getting this right. The UK is the first one to legislate for climate change, for net zero carbon by 2050. Well done us. We're up there saying we're going to do it. About 29% of all carbon emissions come from the built environment. We've got to hit the built environment really hard. Who's going to do it? Who is going to be who are going to be the big contributors to making a substantial difference in the built environment? Do I think that the house builders, the Persimmons of this world, are going to lead the way? No, I do not. I won't be too unkind on them today, but I just don't believe that that's where we're going to see innovation, progress, serious investment in the longer term. And it's not going to be the private landlords either who make a difference. Each of us who are homeowners have got a part to play, but in terms of making an impact and getting on with it, it's got to be the social housing providers. And if they fail and the UK can't quite make it, I can't see other countries making it. This means there's an awful lot hanging on social housing providers really getting to work on this, and Raven is doing just that, and great. Well done, Raven. Raven is also proving, I've tuned into the previous couple of sessions, and Raven is proving, Jonathan, well done you're proving that the problem is not a technical one. It's not impossible to get to zero carbon. We can do it. We can't do it on our own. We're going to depend increasingly on electricity, and government is the one that is going to ensure that electricity is emits less carbon. About 15%, I think, of the total target will be achieved by using renewable energy for our electricity that we're going to switch to, because gas will have to go. It's a big thing losing the gas supply, but the Prime Minister is saying it's going to invest very heavily in offshore wind. Yeah, good to hear the words. Let's hope we get the action as well as the words, because that's really good. Using renewables so that electricity, it doesn't itself require burning fossil fuels. So that's going to be big. But what Raven's been showing is that the rest of it, we can do it within the built environment. We, the social housing providers, can actually achieve huge change. It's going to be ground source heat pumps. It's going to be air source heat pumps. It's going to be building stuff that is very well insulated in using modern methods of construction. it's all possible. Even that retrofitting of the stock is all possible. Now, Stuart, your question at the beginning was about the funding. And of course, everyone says, yeah, this is all good stuff, but we've got a lot of other things to spend our money on. We'd like to do lots of fire safety stuff. We're going to have to do a lot of fire safety stuff. This is expensive. Our rental income doesn't look as brilliant as it once did. We would like to do more social renting rather than affordable rents, but it all costs money. And this is frankly rather low on our agenda at the moment. So say some. It's a long way off 2050. But in fact, I think the extra cost, this is manageable, spread over, as long as we get on with it and we don't keep delaying and doing a kind of Brexit, the last minute, all the negotiations have to happen overnight. You can't do that with retrofitting and new build the housing stock in the UK. We've got to get on with it now. And if we do, we can get there in advance even of 2050. These things are possible, and the cost will not be ridiculous. Let's just look at some of these costs. I think there's new build and there's retrofit. There's, we've got the existing stock and we've got the stuff that is going to be newly built. With new build, land values have to take a hit for greater affordability, and they have to take a hit for achieving carbon reductions. It's in negotiating for the purchase of land that either the house builders or the housing associations have to build in the cost, the extra cost of the actual production of the home at the end of the day, because we're spending far too much on the land. And there is a huge margin there of opportunity to pay less when we buy at the beginning and then have more to spend on the property itself. And we've got to understand that and get into that over a period of time. What would make everybody take account of the need for zero carbon? It has to be building regulations. We have to make it compulsory, I think, or the house builders won't do anything about it. We've got to make it compulsory to get to C by 2035, to EPC C by 2035, and indeed to get to zero carbon emissions by 2050. We have to put in place the legislative framework, the building regulations that make that happen. And that's coming down the track. There's a private members bill, the domestic premises brackets energy efficiency bill. There's one in the House of Lords and one in the House of Commons. Everything is jammed at the moment with all the COVID stuff going on, but we'll get legislation. I think I'm relatively confident it'll happen, and then it's impossible to escape the requirement to achieve those improvements, and that needs to be reflected in land values. Going to need grants as well. When it comes to retrofitting, we've now got the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. This is 15,000 to 30,000 per unit. If you've got stuff that is D or below, and you have, because jolly nearly half of all of social housing, council housing and housing association properties fail on the C test, they're below C. That's where the funding is going to be targeted. We're starting with a demonstrator, and I'm hoping Raven will be part of this. You have to work with a local authority. The decarbonisation fund is going to be £3.8 billion over the next 10 years, but there's only a little bit in the first year, but they want to get on with it. They've got these demonstrator projects going through, the first 50 million for that. There will be hard cash for retrofitting, and housing associations need to be absolutely ready for it, ready to go, and not dragging any heels, really up for it. Now, I chair the Affordable Housing Commission. I think, Stuart, you mentioned that, and we've just put out a report on calling for a national housing conversion fund. This is to meet our special goal, which is to try and rebalance the housing world between the private rented sector, which has doubled in size, and the social sector, which is halved in size. We want to rebalance those two and get to switch back to more social housing, to more council and housing association accommodation. Oh God, there goes my phone. Apologies. How often does that happen? But yeah, so the National Housing Conversion Fund, we're asking for £1.3 billion for this fund to yes, take advantage of house builders who think that prices are artificially high at the moment and are bound to fall, and are trying to get out of the market. So we want to get some of those stalled sites. We want to get some of the stuff that's on the stocks already, but we also want to use that money to buy up privately rented property and switch it back into social renting and modernize it, bring it up to standards. There's an awful lot of rubbishy PRS stuff that this is going to be a golden moment. We see landlords as increasingly in trouble. They're facing arrears. Evictions are becoming a real difficulty for them, thank goodness, in many ways. There's lots of regulations coming through. Landlords are going to be selling, getting out of the market. We think this is a big opportunity for social housing providers to get in there and modernize. And I think because of the jobs, because of the spin-off benefits that are, as well as the decarbonisation benefits, the savings from getting fuel poverty down, for savings for the health service of there being fewer damp and cold properties. There's so much going for investment in modernising the existing stock that I'm absolutely sure that government funding is going to follow that. So, to conclude, this is a vital mission. We're on something that's really important. It's possible to achieve it. It is affordable. We're going to have to get reduced costs of the new things that we're doing, and we will, because modern methods of construction will help, and scale will really bring down prices. We need to use the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund as it comes through. It would be good if we could get this National Housing Conversion Fund and buy up more from the PRS. All these things are possible. If you who are listening are not a chief executive and you think it's not up to you, I think a lot of the pressure for social housing landlords to get into this comes from the middle ranks of the housing sector. It's ordinary people out there who put pressure on their chief executive, on their board, and say, come on, we ought to be up front and doing these things. We shouldn't be at the back of the queue. So go for it, and congratulations to Raven for being in the front already. Thank you.
That's great, Richard. Thank you so much. Yeah, I love that. Biggest mission of all, you know. I think it's great to hear that from you, and thanks very much for those insights. Okay, we're going to pass on now to Helen Gregg, who's the Managing Director for Obsidian Enterprises. So, Helen, I'm just going to get to your first slide. Okay, over to you.
Lovely, thanks, Stuart. So, I'm going to start with the Avengers, which is a brilliant link from Lord Best's last point about the mission, actually. It's an obvious place to start when you're thinking about net zero, I imagine you're all saying. During lockdown, one of the things we considered a wise investment for our two children was to get Disney+. And as a result of all of that, we have created a new family tradition of watching an Avengers film every week, which has been brilliant, apart from the disappointingly low number of female role models for my daughters. But that's a whole different webinar, so I won't go into that now. Now, I'm not sure if you've ever seen the Avengers, but in a nutshell, the Avengers consist of a bunch of superheroes in their own right. So you've got Hulk, Black Widow, Captain America, Spider-Man, Iron Man. They've all got their own films, their own franchises, and they all save the world individually. But they're also part of this bigger group, the Avengers, so they can work together on things. And when there's a really big problem, they act as a team. So I see social housing providers a lot like that. I think independently, we're all heroes in our own right. We're doing the right thing that we want to do in terms of addressing homelessness, providing social rent, affordable rent. That's great. But really, the strength in social housing provision is when we come together and we make a big difference together. So next slide, please, Stuart. So what's our end game? I'm assuming if you're watching this webinar, that one of your end games at least is net zero. And I think that's a really important point, one that's just been made excellently by Lord Best. So whilst I've no doubt that most social housing providers are individually doing their bit, it's the big changes we need to be leading the way on. And given our business model, the biggest change we can make is around our stock. Now, I'm not dealing with the stock that we already have. I'm going to focus really squarely on development. And when you look at traditional construction, I've put some of the statistics up there. But frankly, it's shocking in terms of the contribution traditional construction makes to emissions, to carbon footprint, to waste in this country. And it's quite alarming. So next slide, please, Stuart. Whereas modern methods of construction, MMC, I'm not going to go into the detail about them, but if you look down that list, you can see some of the real benefits of it. And what I've always found fascinating is that when people talk about the benefits of MMC, they really focus on the speed or the quality or the manufacturing side of it, but they rarely talk about the environmental benefits. Now, for me, the environmental benefits are obvious. I think if you just even take the very simple fact that MMC properties are built in a factory where a few people go to every day, as opposed to a building site where hundreds of people might go to over the course of a 12-month period, you take that right through to the fact 90% less waste. I mean, 90%, that is significant. And right through to the fact that it's the quality at the end of it, vastly superior quality, which reduces leakage in terms of air, reduces the need for heating, not to mention the reduction of fuel poverty for residents who are living in them. The environmental benefits of MMC are really significant. And if you need an argument for why you should be starting down the MMC journey, or if you want to look at what we can do to make net zero as an organisation, MMC as part of your development programme is absolutely crucial. So next slide, please. Now, I'm not advocating that everyone just stops doing traditional construction and moves straight onto MMC. It's not that simple. I understand that. There's loads of barriers that are perceived barriers for people. It's different. So we have brilliant development teams in the sector, but this is a new way of doing it. It's not construction, it's manufacturing. So people haven't quite the same level of confidence. There is a perception that it costs more. I think you can definitely pay more up front for MMC, but there's some brilliant research by Magna with Roll Along, who've done work in the Southwest to demonstrate that on a discounted cash flow basis, MMC can pay back up to 5 years sooner because there are ongoing cost savings within the life cycle of an MMC property. The standardization, people don't like standardization. Everyone likes to think that they do things differently. And just to quickly link back to the Avengers, Iron Man has an ego, Captain America has an ego, but the point is when they compromise, it can be really powerful. And I think you might want to think that you're different in terms of your properties, but Building Better did some research and showed that 88% similarity in employers' requirements. We're not all that different, and that's really important. And then there's loan securitization. That's again a whole different issue, but the National Housing Federation and Mark Farmer are working with government to lead on that, and that should be an issue that gets resolved fairly rapidly, hopefully. Okay, next slide, please, Stuart. So to finish, bringing it neatly back to the Avengers, what can we do about that? What can you do in order to start your MMC journey and therefore move towards net zero? The first one is collaborate. We cannot do this individually. The collective purchasing power is the only real way to develop a balanced relationship with manufacturers, unless you're someone like Places for People. The manufacturers are huge. If a smaller housing association with a pipeline of maybe an annual pipeline of 50 properties goes to talk to them, there is a real imbalance of power. You're not going to be able to garner the kind of deals that you want to get. So work together, work with other people to do that, because together it becomes a very different conversation. Then there's the design. If everyone gets their heads together, you can end up with a home that works for more social housing residents as a basic and is therefore more fit for purpose for life, which is really important. Constant improvement is important. But again, if you're approaching a manufacturer on your own to talk to them, you're never going to get those improvements. You need to go in a group and do it together, become a real part of the voice for the sector. And the same with quality. With collective purchasing power, you can be clear on the standards that you want and get them. Because if everyone's saying the same thing to manufacturers as one big customer, then they will listen and they will adapt, because that's how they are operating. And if you're wondering how to do that collective approach, Building Better is a really good way to do that. There are other groups out there. You can get together with a group of other like-minded organisations. What I'd suggest, though, is you go with an established group like Building Better, simply because the amount of work involved is vast and they've done it for you. The second thing you can do is compromise. And going back to the issue between Iron Man and Captain America, it's hard sometimes. We all like to be different. We all like to be unique in our own different way. But with standardization, sometimes you've just got to let it go. And I'm conscious that's from a different film, different children's film. But if you like this handle more than that, you've always worked with these kitchens. Actually, I get that. I get the information, the asset management implications might be difficult, but are they insurmountable? Is that the kind of thing that's really going to stand in the way of you working with MMC and therefore getting a much better carbon footprint for your organisation? It shouldn't be. And the same with the process. So you've always used JCT contracts, you've always done a design and build. This is a different world. It's manufacturing, it's not construction, and there are different ways of doing things. And you can do them. And it's actually, sometimes you'll be really surprised about how much easier they can make things. But a lot of this is about letting the past go and accepting it's a whole new way of doing things. If you want to make a big change, you have to do things completely differently, not incrementally differently. And then the final one, just commence. Just start somewhere. If you have no idea how to start on this journey, there are lots of people like us out there. Talk to us, get an idea. Building Better are brilliant. You can approach me. There's a lot of people who will be able to talk to you and just give you that initial step. Just do something about it. Imagine what we can achieve if no one cares who has achieved it. Together we can do it. So, thank you.
That's great, Helen. Thank you so much. Okay, I love the Avengers. At any point, my children would be especially enjoying that presentation. But yeah, I think a really useful message there, so Helen, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move to our final speaker for this part of the session, Jonathan Higgs. Jonathan, over to you.
Great, thanks, Stuart. And thanks, Helen and Richard. They're really interesting insights. I'm going to chat about three things, and we'll weave in what Richard and Helen have said. I'm going to talk a little bit about why bother. Going to talk about what Raven has done so far and the position that we've arrived at, and also the obstacles that we can see ahead of us from where we're currently standing, and then some general reflections. So why bother? Lord Best has touched on three of these things already. It helps that there is a government target, and the government's got to be applauded for setting it. And what is a government target today will become a regulatory requirement tomorrow, and a funding condition and an evaluation consideration. So these things are heading our way. And if you want sticks to be beaten with, they will be there shortly, I am certain. But on the side of the carrots, there are plenty of things that would reinforce why housing associations would want to get cracking with this. Already been mentioned, the economic opportunity and the jobs that can be created. The IPPR reckons that by 2035, 325,000 jobs could be created just in low carbon heating sector alone. And Raven's already talking to a local college and a green technology supplier to look at shaping courses we need to create the skilled workforce of tomorrow. And so there are huge opportunities here, particularly for locally based housing associations. And meanwhile, we've always, as housing associations, been concerned with the link between health and housing. £1 spent on retrofitting fuel poor homes saves 42 pence in the NHS. I wouldn't like to have done that calculation, but apparently New Economics have. And so there are real benefits to wider society from that investment. But what's most striking maybe is just the role that Lord Best already painted really for the sector, that we're really well placed to do this and to look good in the process. We've got the governance and the collaboration and a track record of delivery, particularly with decent homes. And of course, the long-term commitment to our residents and their communities. But perhaps what's one of the strongest motivators for us at Raven is affordability. We did a piece of research last year called The Voice of the Customer, where we spoke to 300 of our residents in quite a lot of detail, got an external agency to help us. And the most pressing priority for them was affordability. And so if we can, through delivering a net zero carbon agenda or retrofit agenda, deliver £6 a week savings to our residents on their fuel bills alongside improved comfort and warmth, then that's a major contribution to something that is of the most importance to them in a world where we're looking at CPI at rents at CPI plus 1% in the future. And I'm not an advocate, and I'm pleased to see the polls suggest not many of you are either, of tenants paying for improvements. They could easily be forgiven for thinking that they already have. And finally, as my board reminded me yesterday, and I'll share some insights from our board away day yesterday, it's the right thing to do. Climate change kills, and we don't really need a regulator or a funder or a valuer to tell us that. Stuart, would you flip on to the next slide, please? Great. Just share with you a little bit of progress to date at Raven. When I wrote this slide, I really didn't feel we'd come very far relative to how far we've got to go, but you've got to start somewhere. We lifted the rock on and looked underneath at how much it was going to cost us to get to net zero carbon. It's interesting, just to kind of, my board were very keen that we are very clear on what we mean by net zero carbon. And actually, the cost we've come up with isn't to get us to net zero carbon. That's just going to cost too much. It's to get us to around about 85% carbon reduction on our current position, with an assumption that the decarbonisation of the grid will take care of the rest. And if we have to, we'll look at some minor offsetting. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, of course, it doesn't yet take into account the kind of things Helen was talking about, which is carbon emissions in the supply chain. This is just looking at the carbon of the carbon emissions on our homes and how we get them down to a level where we stand a fighting chance of achieving that target. And the answer is going to cost us £104 million. And even when you say it quickly, it still sounds like a lot of money. And that's including VAT and overheads and deducting what we already had in our business plan, and a prudent assumption about what efficiency savings might come over the term of the programme. We've also had a stab at looking at net zero carbon in our new builds, and where we're in control of the development, our intention is to deliver net zero carbon on those developments. Where we're buying from a developer, which these days is far less likely for us, we'll price in retrofits into our offer. But we operate in the real world, and we realise this could rapidly stop us from building any more affordable homes in a world where there are part of the world where there's a desperate need. So we are, where we can't achieve this, we make it explicit as part of our approval process that exactly what our approach is going to be to getting these homes to a net zero. And for building for sale, we're going to be far more phased because we've got to match what the market demands, and I'll return to that a bit later. And now, of course, Lord Best mentioned that making the choices. There's a lot of competing demands for scarce resources. For us, the numbers look like around about £10 million for health and safety, around £30 million for home standard. More money we want to put into homelessness and the housing crisis in terms of meeting the demands for additional homes. More money into community investment post-COVID, £4.5 million into digital transformation, which most of us are involved in, I'm sure. And of course, £104 million for net zero carbon. So, you know, these are big sums, £5 million here, £100 million there. Pretty soon it adds up to real money. And we have to make some choices about what we do, or at the very least, the sequence that we do it in. So, Stuart, would you just flick on to the next slide, please? So standing where we are today and looking ahead, what's in our way? These are actually, most of these are taken from an NHF survey it's the National Housing Federation survey of its members. So this list will be very familiar to you if you're in a housing association. But I think that the couple that I want to dwell on, first and foremost, is clarity in government policy. We've got a stated end game, but what we really need is a policy roadmap to 2050 that sets out exactly what's expected of housing associations, the standards and requirements they're expected to build in order to meet this zero carbon ambition. And it's linked to the need that we have for clarity over access to that £3.8 billion decarbonisation fund. when it's available and how we access it, and ideally ready access, direct access by associations rather than via local authorities. But principally, it's certainty and clarity is what we need, and certainly what the supply chain will need. And sitting with my board yesterday, this was the major obstacle to fixing net zero carbon as part of our business plan. It will be in the business plan, but what we're struggling to see is what the expectations are for us. The worst thing we could do is embark on solutions that aren't going to meet expectations that are published further down the road. Our suspicion is that this clarity is delayed a little bit. The COP26, the Conference of Parties that's been pushed down the road to November 21, may well be an integral part of government firming up on this policy position, but the sooner they're able to do it, the better. Collaboration and innovation that Helen spoke about, I'm not really that fussed about it. I genuinely think that this is something that we need and that we expect, and it will follow as soon as we get going. If you read the pilot bid for the decarbonisation fund, that is expecting efficiencies between 5 and 33% within the time frame of the programme, which is quite optimistic. But we will deliver efficiencies. I'm confident of that. And in fact, I'll be really disappointed if we don't transform our solutions over the next 30 years. It's not a case of choosing between Betamax and VHS technology. Really, we expect to be the equivalent of streaming technology in our solutions to delivering net zero carbon over the next 30 years. I'm not overly concerned either about supply chain capability and capacity. We need an awful lot of work on it, but frankly, I'm in the school of thought that if you build it, they will come, that the market will respond to it. And technical know-how, we've got technical solutions now to deliver a lot of this. We will innovate, we will drive down costs, we will make it better and more convenient for the end user, but we do have technology now to get cracking. And as I say, it's really not rocket science to get started. I think that the concern about the degree of resident resistance is probably questionable. I'm not sure how many of us really know what our residents think about this, and to the extent that Place Shapers, and I sit on the board of Place Shapers and TPAS, are going to do a bit of work to try and find out more about this. But I was struck by some focus group work that the National Grid did just 3 weeks ago, looking at sentiment amongst consumers, and they found a real willingness to act despite a lack of knowledge, some poor awareness of options, but really strong interest. Some concern about practicalities, about disruption, the space needed, and the quality of the heating experience after installation, which are all things we would expect. The need for independent, trusted advice, but interestingly, real concern from those they spoke to about the need for a just transition and an assurance that the most vulnerable in our communities won't be left behind. So some interesting messages there, I think, about latent demand and the level of understanding. And finally, strategy and business case. That's in our control. If we get one and make the case, then we can get cracking. That's not for somebody else to do, that's for us. Last slide, please, Stuart. Just my final reflections, really. We can't do it all. We face some difficult choices, but clarity in government policy will help us have confidence in those choices. When we get clarity, we can respond. The pilot document is great. It would be better if we didn't have just 8 weeks to bid and 12 months to deliver, but it's great. It gives clarity and it provides money. And again, it's to be applauded. Slightly uncomfortable, putting net zero carbon in your plans and shifting your new build standards when others aren't. Or aren't yet. I know we're all at different stages here and we all have competing demands for our cash, but it's going to be so much healthier for us all if we move forward together on this, not least because of the impact we can have on the marketplace. There needs to be a much wider conversation, and I realise COVID is squeezing that out at the moment, but a conversation that shifts behaviours, So it changes what people value and the extent to which people are prepared to invest and pay for it. And then finally, a kind of upbeat message, or at least one that I hope will be upbeat. Not all our homes will clear the bar for investments. We've got a lot of homes that simply are not worth investing the money in to get them up to net zero. So we can see ourselves playing a much greater role, I think, in the regeneration of our communities and become real agents of change in those communities, far more than we are already, and we already are doing that very well. So what a huge opportunity that presents for us and for the communities where our homes sit. So few thoughts there from me. Thanks very much. Back to you, Stuart.
That's great, Jonathan. Well, thank you so much for that. Okay, and thank you to all our panelists for 3 excellent and very stimulating and insightful presentations. Okay, so we're now going to move on to the question and answer session. I'm pleased to say we've had plenty of questions coming in. Perhaps unsurprisingly, quite a few of those have focused on funding. So it might be useful just to let's just remind ourselves of what our little impromptu poll showed us. So let's look at that again. Here we go. So in terms of the attendees of today's webinar, anyway, I don't know how representative this is of the sector as a whole, but a third of you there obviously either unsure or looking at using a different approach to get the funds you need to cover the extra cost of the journey to net zero carbon. I know, Jonathan, you mentioned in your remarks that perhaps didn't surprise you that certainly so few people were looking at resident charges. What did you think of the results elsewhere? Does that kind of mirror your experience at Raven, do you think?
Yeah, it does. I'd be really interested to know what people had got in the other box. I think that it is likely that we'll be looking at disposal of some properties as well, and that might be what some people were thinking about in the other. And I think that's inevitable. I think we need to be really careful as a sector about the approach we take to disposal of properties that aren't going to fit the bill. So not properties we're going to knock down and regenerate, but ones we're going to out and out sell. Obviously, we're reusing those funds to re-provide or to fund the retrofit elsewhere. But we've got to be careful about what we're selling and the use to which it's going to be put. But I certainly think that will be a part of the mix. And I think we will be raising more funds from banks and investors. And I think you can already see the markets taking account of green funding. And they'll also be taking account of businesses' plans for delivering against this agenda in the way that they price and make funding available in the future. I don't think that's that far away, to be honest. So that was quite an interesting spread. I'm reassured that there aren't that many people expecting our residents to pay for this.
Yeah, okay. Maybe perhaps useful to get your insight, Lord Best. I mean, you mentioned during your remarks that you felt, maybe not confidence, I know you didn't use that word, but you felt it was likely that the government would at some point come back to the table with further grant funding to support housing providers in the journey to net zero carbon. I'm just wondering, what do you think in terms of what needs to happen before then, in terms of getting to that point? Because obviously people are thinking about these decisions now.
Quite. Well, we get carrots, grants, yeah, sure. They're not doing too badly, frankly. I think in terms of shaking the money tree, decarbonisation gets a good shake. In some ways it's an easier battle, that one, than trying to get rents down and get back to social rents instead of affordable rents. I'm finding more receptivity from government on the decarbonisation agenda, but there's the sticks as well. And this is how government sticks don't cost the government so much. We've just told private landlords that they've got to get to the pathetic EPC-E. We're not giving them anything very special to help with that. We're just telling them that's what they've got to do. And they can't, not only can they not re-let any property, but even the properties that landlords already own have got to be brought up to that standard. That E will become C in due course, yeah, with 2 or 3 years notice, but landlords will just have to do it. When it comes to new build, we're going to see building regulations tightened and tightened. And at first, the house builders will all go crazy and moan that it's impossible, we can't do this, this will knock our profits for six. We only made just over $1 billion last year in profits at Persimmon and Taylor Wimpey. But yeah, they'll be told. When we try to improve accessibility standards with the first round of lifetime homes, we're now getting with our M42 level 2 new space accessibility standards. That's great, but part 1 was greeted by the house builders as you remember, it required no front door step anymore. The lifetime home standards meant you couldn't anymore have a couple of steps up to the front door. Oh, the house builders couldn't, we can't cope with this. They launched the SOS, the Save Our Step campaign, the Great British Doorstep. Oh God. But once the regulations Part M changed, that was what you had to do. Everybody does it. We don't have 2 big steps up to front doors anymore anywhere in the United Kingdom. It just happened. They get used to it. So there will be a kickback, but building regs will just press forward, and we will relentlessly increase standards that way towards zero carbon.
Okay, I want to bring you in, Helen, as well. I think certainly one of the key themes in your remarks was around the opportunity, and obviously that's one of the key things we're talking about today. So the opportunity for housing providers to be collaborating, to be making the most of the potential of things like using manufacturing to really help deliver on some of these things. But you mentioned, and I thought it was interesting, you mentioned the point that actually sustainability is not necessarily seen as one of the kind of flagship highlights of moving to modern methods of construction, and yet obviously there are clear benefits, and as you set out in that way too. But just wondering, from a funding perspective though, you talk about the real the opportunities around collaboration. I mean, does that translate into perhaps the bottom line for housing providers too? Does that mean they would be able to be delivering in some of their requirements and commitments to tenants more with less cost than might otherwise be the case?
Yeah, and I mean, the key thing with everything is for people to recognise that this is not building in a different way. This is manufacturing, and it's completely different. And the key for the manufacturers is that they need scale, they need standardisation, and when they do all of that, their costs come down because they can repeat issues, they can minimize their materials, and all of that translates into the bottom line. And this is why the collaboration piece is so important, again, because actually going with a pipeline of 50 per annum to a manufacturer, you're never going to recognize those cost efficiencies. You go as part of a big consortium when you're saying, right, well, we're going to be procuring 5,000 homes a year. Suddenly their eyes light up, they want to talk, they want you around the table, and they are not only willing to talk about the cost of that, because if they can guarantee their pipeline and they can guarantee their manufacturing space, suddenly that makes a big difference to them financially. They're also then willing to look at the changes you can make to that, which in turn benefit the housing association financially. I think the key thing with cost with MMC is it might not be cheaper in the short term, and I think that's the point. A lot of the prices are starting to come down as the security is there, and you can get cheaper than traditional construction up front, but it needs to be looking at the net present value calculations. You need to be looking at this over a 30-year life cycle costing to an extent for now. One of the things that's really been a topic to lobby government on from my perspective has been the idea of short-term grant funding. Give grant in the first instance to incentivize MMC, because actually it's that initial cost hurdle that's the problem. And if government could give grant, they only need to do it for about 10 years, because once the sector are all building with MMC, that cost will come down naturally. And I think it's a classic economic intervention. They need to put the economic stimulation in at the buying end, not at the delivery end at this stage, because actually the delivery side of it, they will realise their costs naturally if the buying end has got those finances in place in the first instance. So yes, I think from a financial perspective, there's real benefits to collaboration. There's real economic benefits to working together with the manufacturers, because between you, when a manufacturer's got a guaranteed pipeline in there, they will talk about all sorts of things.
Okay, thank you, Helen. There's a question here, picking up one of the points I think that you made, Lord Best, around land and viability, obviously. Stephen McKenna has asked a question around that point, and I suppose around how you see that working in practice, because obviously clearly land, is still hugely competitive. Land market, again, as Jonathan was setting out in his remarks as well, there's still a lot of competition for land, particularly in around Surrey and places like that where Raven is based, but obviously elsewhere for other housing associations too. I'm just wondering how you see that happening.
Quite. Well, there's sort of two goes of that. First of all, what we found with Section 106 is that house builders passed on the cost to them, to the landowner. Basically, what you said when you were negotiating with that farmer to buy those 6 acres that you were going to do your big, lovely greenfield site development on, you said to the farmer, we can't give you £1 million an acre because this rotten council has required us to do 25% affordable housing under this Section 106. We can only give you 777,000 or whatever it was at the time. It gets built into the price once there is a requirement on the developer. From the beginning, they're going to just have to pay less, and then their profits have not suffered. And in the same way, a social housing landlord has got more to spend on the building because they spent less on the land. But I think in the longer term, my Affordable Housing Commission bought into Sir Oliver Letwin's report. The Letwin report said, we've handed over power to the house builders. They now run the show, really, and they decide what goes on that site and what happens. And we're constantly fighting a war to try to get them to behave better, but it's a one-sided thing, and they've got the consultants and lawyers on their side and the planners haven't. But Oliver said, what we need to do is local authorities should set up development corporations, buy the land, pay the price without any hope value in it to a maximum of 10 times use value, acquire the site, and then decide with a master plan what's going to happen to it, parceling it out to housing associations, schemes for students, affordable, shared ownership, all the different things, and the other amenities required depending on the scale of the project. Parcel it out again. So this wasn't a nationalization of land per se, but it was a step in the direction of getting back control. Seemed to be, there might be a phrase somewhere hidden in there. Take back control and get because the land is the key to everything that follows. And if you've got to pay an enormous sum and you're held to ransom and everything else is squeezed by the land value, no good comes of it except to the landowner. So Letwin was his report, which has been buried, I notice, but he's regarded as the most intellectual of the Conservative politicians, and a very clever man. It's a very good report. It will be revived in due course, I hope.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think, that's really useful. I think that kind of covers off a couple of other questions that have come in around the role for local authorities, and some of this too. Jonathan Essex was asking around that, and so was David Smith. So you've covered off a couple of things there, which is great. Jonathan, I just want to come to you again, if I may, just to pick up on thinking about the opportunity here really, and what that might mean for housing providers. Obviously, we've all talked now about collaboration and things like that as a means to move things forward. And I really like the idea around how that collective action and maybe not even collective action, just people starting to move more now could really help to spur the market to be delivering more options and to be innovating more in the way that you might need. But I really liked what you were saying about the opportunity from a housing provider perspective to think about what that means locally in terms of job creation and things like that. I wondered if you could just talk a wee bit more about that in terms of how you see that as an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, housing associations are hugely creative and innovative animals. I mean, I think they're often looked at because we have this long-term stewardship role, and we're here for the long term, and we definitely don't put social housing assets at risk, but we're hugely creative organisations, and we can't help but see loads of opportunities here. So Raven has a DLO, and we provide repairs to our properties. Like many housing associations and many ex-LSVTs. But we can already see opportunities of working with green suppliers. So we're talking to heat pump manufacturers and installers about working with them, working with them, maintaining their installations in the long term, and doing that as part of a commercial opportunity for us. And we have quite a few commercial activities, including build for sale, like many associations do, that bring profits back into the organisation. So that we can see the opportunity there. Then we think about the retraining challenge for our staff and the kind of skills we're going to need in the future. So we talked to the local college about how they are gearing up for this. They have a major program of construction training right the way through to from the very kind of entry level up to senior management level, and we are working with them and a green technology supplier to look at designing courses that are going to be right for what the market needs in 2, 5, 10 years time. And that's at a local level. You know, when you start to join these things up between housing associations, the opportunities increase exponentially. The kind of work Helen, we're a part of when we first met Helen, the Building Better project, the offsite manufacture, and delivering environmental improvements off the back of that manufacturing solution. And that is a collaboration exercise, a number of major associations coming together to put their programs together and give that continuity. That's on new build. I'm sure the same opportunity exists on retrofit as well. We'll all have different archetypes, different solutions for different properties, but aggregating them and getting those economies of scale and that predictable pipeline it's a no-brainer, and it will happen because housing associations are great at making things like that happen.
Thank you, Jonathan. Helen, do you want to come in on that at all? I was just conscious that was one of the key things you were talking about in your slides, but I'm thinking, you know, clearly you've got a good overview of the market from the point of view of, you know, what sort of what response there is from suppliers to the demands that are now coming their way from housing providers to an increasing extent. We've seen the next Affordable Homes programme obviously is going to require an increased percentage of MMC to be used in what's delivered there. And I'm just wondering, you know, to what extent do you see the market response as really helping housing associations and local authorities to be able to better deliver the changes they need to do?
Yeah, I think the it kind of goes back to the economic point I made before, which is that the market response isn't quite worked on its own in terms of true economics as yet, which is why it needs some level of intervention at some point. And it feels like the intervention needs to be at the demand end rather than the supply end of it. But what has been fascinating is over the last 2 years watching the manufacturers, who many of whom initially wrote social housing off as something that they weren't interested in working with. They were focused on the private sector. We've seen a lot of the big private developers have developed their own MMC factories to varying degrees of success, I mean, it should be said. And suddenly the manufacturing environment turned around and started saying, this could be our biggest customer. And actually they have started, there's been some notable manufacturers really making inroads with housing associations, going to pains to make sure that they are designing properties that really meet the demands. And I think just interesting, picking up on Jonathan's point about the job side of it, that's absolutely crucial, because what was something I used to get asked quite a lot was, but we're going to be putting people out of jobs. If we go down the MMC route, we're going to be putting people out of jobs here. The jobs are gone. I mean, depending on who you speak to, basically the average age of a bricklayer in this country is either 56 or 58, depending on which piece of research you look at. People aren't training in construction anymore. I mean, realistically, if you're given a choice at 16, 18 about would you like to go and work outside in the freezing cold for 6 months of the year and then enjoy 6 months in the summer-ish, maybe in this country, or would you like to work in a factory where you can develop some really good transferable skills? This is where it's going. No one's putting anyone out of a job. The reality is, from an economic perspective, the market is doing exactly the right thing. We get people building with MMC. It's creating jobs. It will create more jobs. There are a lot of manufacturers putting pop-up factories into local regions in order to make sure there is a level of regional security for their work as well. So if you, as a housing association, you're based in the southwest, you're working with a factory based in the northeast, you've still got the ability to generate economic work, economic benefits for your region. So I think the whole picture is there. It doesn't need to be one or the other. The two can coexist quite nicely, but the reality is traditional construction is on the way out anyway. So we might as well take all the benefits of modern methods and really harness them. And I think Raven's doing exactly the right thing, getting in before the crowd, frankly. So well done.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's a nice note to bring us to a conclusion, and thank you very much, Helen. I'm afraid time has gotten away from us. That's all we have time for just now. There were a couple, one last quick question there was there from Ellie George, which was asking Lord Best about what sort of things should be said to those leaders to persuade them that action must be taken. I'll pick up a couple of remarks you made earlier, Richard, about this is the biggest mission of all, and that housing associations and local authorities can punch massively above their weight on this. I think those, as Jonathan said in his remarks too, that it's the right thing to do, and climate change, unfortunately, is really affecting lives around the world. So I think there's some pretty clear messages that have come through today around the arguments that, while there's lots of competing pressures just now for housing providers, there's still very compelling arguments. So that's all we have time for just now. Thank you very much to all of you for attending today. Thank you very much to our panel for a great discussion and some really great presentations. All of the slides from today and from the previous two sessions are available on Raven's website, so please do check those out. You'll receive an email with a link to those as well as a quick survey. If you could complete that for Raven too, that'd be really helpful. But thanks again for your time, and thanks for joining us.
Well, Stuart.